Wonderful. So welcome to the NLP Society in Sweden. How many here, raise your hand, have heard about the wonderful and lovely Judith Simon Prager and verbal first aid before? Raise your hand and wave it. So for whom is this absolutely news? See, we have both kinds, Judith. So I'll just say I'm the chairman of the society, and we try to do a webinar the 15th every month because we believe in spreading good news and good techniques that can be used out of the box. And Judith, you're a favorite. You've been here. You've been to Sweden. You've taught a lot of us, and we practice fervently verbal first aid. And everybody here has come through the NLP Society. So it's going to be a lot of NLP people where we're using words on purpose. And the floor is yours to, tell us, I'll be asking you questions if for whatever reason you don't have an answer. But if you just put yourself on the map, how this all started and what are your thoughts on verbal first aid?
Verbal first aid, we say that it is a way to set a trajectory for recovery. It really began with the idea that the words that you say at the scene of a crisis or a panic or when people are in fear, that what you say goes directly into their subconscious mind because they're in an altered state of consciousness. They're frightened, and when you're frightened, you go into that fight, flight, or freeze. And when you're in that state, words said to you become like hypnotic commands, and they become commands to the body because, as well, we all know we're a mind body. So every thought that we have is a physiological reaction. So when somebody's picking somebody up from an accident scene and they say, oh, buddy, you really broke yourself up, there's no way that that person can begin the healing. He goes into the sympathetic nervous system and he starts making adrenaline and cortisol, like, I don't know how to do this, I don't know how to fix myself, I've ruined my life, I broke myself up. Whereas if a rescuer says, we're right here, we know just what to do, we're taking you to the hospital, everything is being made ready, just relax, stop your bleeding and save your blood. And it's really hard to believe that you can say to someone, if it's less than major arterial or major venous bleeding, that you can say to someone, stop your bleeding and save your blood, and they will. But I have doctor testimony on video where the doctors in emergency rooms and firefighters are telling us, the captain of a firefighter brigade was also telling us that what you say, you can actually say, not only stop your bleeding, but there was a firefighter who picked someone up who had gotten debris in his head. He'd fallen off his bicycle and his head was all bleeding and there was debris. And then the bleeding had stopped by the time the fire department arrived there. And they said, will you start your bleeding again so you can clean the wound and then we can know where the wound is? And he started his bleeding. And then as soon as it was clear where the wound was, they said, now stop your bleeding and save your blood. You can do that because the body is responding to these commands, and the body does. Words affect they affect your heart rate, your pulse rate, they affect your allergic reaction, everything. What you say at the scene of a time of crisis can set a course for recovery. We like to put, it's always nice to have a slogan or something. So we say verbal first aid can calm, promote healing, relieve pain, and save lives. And I will tell you a story in case you hadn't heard it from me about how it literally has saved a life that I was experiencing or that I heard about. And for children, and I did a lot of work with pediatricians, work at hospitals all around the world, we say it can turn a scare into a comfort, it can turn a hurt into a healing, and it can change the potential for trauma, for having this be a trauma forever into a time of rescue and a time of their own courage. And I have stories for that too. So I heard a man named Donald Trent Jacobs talk about this. He was a paramedic and a hypnotherapist at a hypnotherapy conference. And he talked about saying, stop your bleeding. And I couldn't believe it was true. And when I found out from doctor testimony that it was true, I said, everybody should know this. when I gave a talk sometime at a university medical center, a nurse came up to me and she said she had seen someone in the street who'd been in an accident. And she said to him, I need you to stop your bleeding right now. And he said, oh, okay. And he did. And there's something so wonderful about it becomes our magic power, and it's just our words. There's something so wonderful about we are empowered to start helping set a course for recovery. And that's what I want everybody to know and to do. So how we speak to people, there's a protocol for verbal first aid. Those of you who have heard my talks, and dear Ulf must have heard it 47 times.
I will hear it 1,047 times if I get the chance.
Thank you. Well, the protocol begins with centering, because most people aren't physicians or aren't rescue people and don't even know that they are empowered to be able to help. One of the reasons that you're empowered to be able to help that I think is so valuable is that when somebody is injured or hurt or frightened, they feel alone. That abandonment business kicks in and they think, I don't know what to do. I've fallen off the roof. I've been in a fire. I don't know what to do. I've ruined my life. And when somebody else is there, they don't even have to be a paramedic. They don't have to be a nurse. When somebody else is there and says, I'm right here, and help is on the way, we go from that sympathetic nervous system, adrenaline and cortisol, to the parasympathetic, where we can, as they say, rest and digest, the part of our brain that allows us to send out those neurochemicals that help us to begin to heal. And we said it just by saying, I'm right here, you're not alone. Being not alone is the first sign that we can actually heal, that we haven't ruined our entire life in this time, or we're not entirely lost. So what we say, whether or not you're a paramedic and you know what you're doing, or a doctor or a nurse, you still can say, I'm right here. I've called for help. I can help you. Help is on the way. And that's really important. So the protocol talks about centering. Centering is, as you know, I'm sure you all know, is even just taking a breath and knowing that as a fellow human being, you are equipped to help someone else. Really, you are. In times of COVID, maybe you can't hold their hand, maybe they can't see the expression on your face, and that's really sad. Here in America, in Southern California, we're in dire straits and we have to walk around with masks, and we shouldn't. I never leave the house. I haven't left the house since March, except to, move the car off the street. That's it. I don't go anywhere. I don't go to stores. I don't go anywhere because it's that bad here. But were I to see someone in the street who was hurt, I would go over and do that and center myself and know that as a fellow human being, I am empowered, allowed, because I know verbal first aid, and you will now too, if you didn't already, to start the healing with that person. So the next thing, and this is, NLP, gain rapport, just pace and lead, let the person know that they're heard. When a person feels heard, they can begin to listen. Until they feel heard, they can't hear anything. When a doctor says to a mother, your daughter has diabetes, the mother, there have been physicians I work with who say, as soon as they say that, your daughter has diabetes, the mother screamed and fainted. What is the daughter to do? How is she going to live with this if it's so tragic that her mother can't even stand it? So instead of giving it a label, what the doctors began to do, which was so wonderful, I love that they liked verbal first aid. Instead of that, they said, because the mother had brought the child in with issues, they said, we have examined little Susie and we know what's going on with her and we know what to do about it. Can you imagine the relief in a mother who was worried about her daughter to hear, we know what to do? So then the doctors start talking about diet and whatever, medication, whatever. And ultimately the mother will say, does this mean she has diabetes? And they will say, well, that's a label for it, but it's more about how we treat it and keep her healthy for her life. And by that time, the mother has been able to hear everything. And so it makes so much difference what you say at a time of crisis that you can really help a person. So we have in the verbal first aid protocol, and it's all in the book, The Worst Is Over. We have in that protocol different, and you'll recognize so many of them, the yes said and the bind and all of those ways to give therapeutic suggestions so that the person can hear it and respond in a positive way. And there's one rule, and this is what I think of as the verbal first aid rule. And that is, well, you all know this, but I'll do it one more time, just so it's on video or something, where we say in hypnosis, close your eyes and imagine any animal in the kingdom of animals, any animal you want to imagine except elephants. Don't think about elephants. Don't think about mother elephants and baby elephants. Don't think about circus elephants. Don't think about African elephants. What are you thinking about? In this sentence, don't think about elephants. There's nothing to think about but elephants. So when you say don't something, what you're doing is planting in that person the idea of the following word. Grandpa walks across the floor and then gets a pain in his heart and falls down. And his granddaughter, who loves him so much, comes running over and says, Grandpa, Grandpa, don't die. What does Grandpa hear? Die. Could I die? That isn't why. He just thought he had a pain. We have to say instead, Grandpa, Grandpa, I'm right here. I'm going to call 911. They know what to do. They'll know how to help you so that you'll feel better and they'll take care of you. That's what you say. My favorite example of what not to say is when a little kid comes to you holding his stomach and you say to him, honey, don't vomit. And he thinks, vomit? I didn't even think about vomit. What a good idea. And then you might as well duck and cover, like, oh, here it comes now. That's not what to say. It's always a suggestion. Whatever you say when a person is in that extremist, is in pain or fear or accident, what you say has to not tell them what not to do, but what to do. So that's what I think of as the main rule for verbal first aid. Say what you want to have happen, not what you don't. Because words can harm and words can heal, and they'll get stuck right there in that little amygdala that puts a little tag on it and says, oh, every time this comes up, you better watch out. Well, we want to instead say, you know how to handle this. You have every resource you need right inside you. Your body is working right this minute to start getting back into homeostasis, to start repairing what happened in the accident. That's why we say the worst is over, because you've already done the horrible thing to yourself, which we don't say to them, but you've already been in this accident. Now your body can start repairing itself. Now you can start recovering. So that's what I think of as the overview of verbal first aid. If there are questions, we can of course talk. What I can do is...
It's wonderful, Judith. I want to say something here. You know, usually when you learn hypnosis and when you learn NLP, you're learning that words actually shape our subjective experience of the world, right? And words are metaphors. Actually, every word is a metaphor. If I say chair, you know, everybody's going to think of a different chair because it's a metaphor. It's a symbolic value. So in a way, you know, say what you want to have happen is always going to be good. I mean, if your words paint a picture of something that you want, that anybody would want, you know, regardless of who they are. But usually this thing is said in the beginning that the brain doesn't understand the word don't. And that's completely wrong. The language part of the brain understands the word don't, but the image part of the brain will have to paint whatever's after, right?
Yes.
So basically, I mean, so if you want to have would it be correct to say that if you want to have a rule of thumb, one would be say things that everybody would like to have happen, and two, make sure there's no use of the word don't, because that means you're painting the wrong picture.
That's absolutely right. And you know, you don't want to have an arbitrary rule for every situation, but I will tell you that when you say what you don't want to have happen, that goes deeply into the mind. So we have to really avoid that. One of the other examples was when I was walking. I had trained an entire hospital in Chicago, Illinois, a whole hospital. I had trained not just the doctors and the nurses. I had trained the guards at the door. I had trained the people who empty the waste baskets. I trained everyone. For a whole week, I was there, 11 different sessions. And it was, yay for you guys, thinking that you could learn everything. And by the time I was ready to leave, I was thinking, this hospital is going to be the smartest hospital in the world. And as I was walking out, I heard a nurse wheeling a young girl out and saying to the mother, I'm sorry to have to say this, but she's going to have some good days and she's going to have some bad days. Well, in American English, there's an expression, I'm going to use it. I wanted to hit her upside the head. I wanted to say to her, don't even predict bad days. That's in her mind now. Bad days. How do I feel now? Is this a bad day? Or am I going to have worse bad days? What is a bad day? And I have to expect them. So that's not what to say. And I wish she had said instead, some days will be better than others. Some days will be better than others on your road to recovery. What you have is both some days, others, and then you make a suggestion that does a trajectory on your road to recovery.
So that's in NLP, people usually say there's a presupposition to things. You're presupposing stuff by assuming it as something. And I'm just translating what you just said into a jargon that we usually use within NLP. So a presupposition, if you say, is this a bad day? You're presupposing bad days. And even if you say, is this a good day? You're presupposing good days, which implies bad days.
Yeah, we only have a few of these and we have a lot of them.
So basically, anything that assumes anything that isn't useful, you could just skip it and say what you want, say the result. And I really like, I've read your book 100 times and I hope to read it 100 more. And I really like the chapters about what to say to children, because in my world, anybody who is hurt, grown men that are hurt really bad will ask for their mother because they will go back to the moment in life when they felt that helpless, which basically is they have the intelligence and emotional ability, maturity of an 8 or 4 or 3 or 2-year-old. So they're going to go, Mom, I want mom. And in that case, you have to disregard that they are grown men or women, and you have to actually talk to them as if they are a child at the age they sound like.
That's right. And so it's not a matter of logical. It's not a matter of being logical at all. It's a matter of suggestion. And we know that in hypnosis. It's a matter of suggestion. Give them a suggestion that takes them where they need to go to recover, to heal, where the chemicals in their bodies start the healing, where they feel safe. Being safe is a very large part of this. And so, this whole began, as you know very well, with M. Eric Wright doing an experiment in the 70s where he had half of the paramedics picking up victims, accident victims, the way they always did, and half of them saying a particular paragraph. And the paragraph said to the person, the worst is over. We've got you now. We're taking you to the hospital. Everything's being made ready for you. You are safe now. Let your body begin to relax, your body temperature, your body bleed just so much that wound is healed, and then stop your bleeding. You are safe. The worst is over. And yes, you're talking to that person like a child, because everybody wants to feel safe when they're frightened.
And there's this, you have these specific ways of, you're describing exactly what to do with children, which is empowering them, which is saying, I need you to help me.
That's right. Be my partner. That's a big one. Be my partner. There's a funny story I sometimes tell. There was a young girl on the cliffs of Northern California. There's beautiful cliffs overlooking the ocean, and by Big Sur. And she slipped, and she was holding on by her fingernails to a 300-foot drop. And the firefighter came and was above her at a higher cliff. And he said to her, and he was Jimmy Barris, very smart firefighter. And he said to her, I would need you to be my partner. I need you to help me in this. So do you know Batman and Robin? And she said, yes, but she was screaming. And he said, well, I'll be Batman and you be Robin and I'll get you out of this. And she goes, no. He looked at her like, she stopped screaming, and there was like, what do we do now? And then she said, I want to be Batman. And he said, okay, you're Batman. You help us get you out of this. And they rescued her from that. But it's so interesting because when you say, be my partner, you say to somebody, instead of being just a victim, and this is true for grownups too, as you point out, Alf, so brilliantly, instead of being just the victim, you are part of the rescue. It's amazing. It's amazing to be able to be, even if you're saying, just would you hold the bandages while I tend to the wound.
But you have another wonderful technique that also that presupposes success without actually being a false affirmation, and it's the I know somebody who.
That's right. Absolutely. Role models. Role models are very important. When first responders pick up people now, they say, we just had somebody with this just 2 months ago, and today they're playing tennis again, because that gives you a future pace. And you know, future pacing, nothing better than that, because if you don't future pace, what you think is this bad or worse. As soon as you're injured or frightened, you think this bad or worse. It's what's wrong with this crazy pandemic is there's no end to it. You can't even see the future pace, because every time you think you do, at least in the United States, every time you think, okay, now we can start talking to each other again in life, they say, oh no, we're going to lock down one more time. So that's the terrible part of it. But when you can say, this is, you know, we're moving toward a goal, that's really important. And when somebody else has done it, then you know you can do it. If doctors would, instead of saying, you know, 66% of people who have multiple sclerosis end up in a wheelchair, if instead they said 34% of people with MS don't, why couldn't you be part of that? That would give you a whole different aim, a whole different way of looking at it.
And that's the same thing, you know, there's this, I mean, some of those jargons are, you know, they're told so many times, but they're useful. So where attention goes, energy flows. Couldn't you tell the true story about the person who had an accident with a motorcycle, and actually, I think they even lost a leg, didn't they?
Yes. Yes. And my friend Mike Harvard, who is, he was the trainer for the Michigan State Police, and he loved verbal first aid. So he trained them all in verbal first aid. And then he wrote me that there was an accident, and he was picking up somebody who had been in an accident, a motorcycle rider. And he saw the leg on the opposite side of the road and the blood trail leading to the body where the man was alive, lying on the ground. And the man said, and Mike said, we're right here. We're going to take care of you. We know what to do. The ambulance is on the way. And the man said, my leg, how is my leg? It's really important in verbal first aid to tell the truth. It's not, because you have to be believed. This is part of gaining rapport. You can't say everything's fine. You're going to be fine. Mike put his hand on the man's chest, and he could feel that the heart was palpitating very strongly. And he pushed the man down because the man wanted to get up and look at his leg. And he held the man down so that he wasn't moving. And he said, I'm putting a tourniquet on your leg. Your leg is injured. I'm putting a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. That was the truth. The man relaxed. He could feel the man's heart slow down. And when the man was in that anxiety, there was more bleeding, because that's what happens when the heart is pulsing, sending blood everywhere. So it just helped the healing. It helped the emotions. There will come a time when this man has to learn that he's lost his leg. But learning it in the midst of this would only harm him, might only give him a heart attack, might only make things worse. So for Mike to say, we're taking care of it. Yes, your leg is injured. I'm taking care of it as best I can right now. And the ambulance is on the way to take you to the hospital. They know just what to do for you.
And also, I'm not sure if it was that case or if it was another way. We also said, can you please check the rest of your body to move the attention away?
Thank you. That's very good. This is just a simple little process I give people who want to give people, number one, pain relief, and number two, to build rapport.
Yeah.
If you see someone with an injury, you say to them, I can see that your arm needs attention. Now, we don't like to say is in pain or hurts, because that sends the brain on an errand to find out what hurt is. So you say, I see your arm needs attention. Will you do me a favor and scan the rest of your body and let me know if there's anything else that needs attention? So immediately, as they're not focusing on the painful arm, they start to get some pain relief. And then you touch them like on the knee or somewhere else that looks good. And you say, how does it feel over here? And because they may have thought they broke their whole self up, that they were just ruined, when they realize that their knee or the rest of their body's okay, they have more relief. And not only that, they are in your presence more comfortable. So you have built rapport. And that's all. All you had to say was scan the rest of your body, and how's it feel over here?
You know, talking right now, I should have realized this a long time ago, and maybe I knew it intuitively, but now for the first time, it really, really falls into place why empathy is not the best way of helping people. Because if a child falls down and gets hurt and you run up and say, oh my God, how are you? You're actually presupposing, like you said with the girl with diabetes and the mother fainting, you're presupposing that this is nasty and awful. So of course the child will try to make you happy.
Well, there's a couple of things about children, like falling out of a tree or the slide, being on the slide and hurting themselves. There are several reactions an adult can have. One is, oh my God, you're bleeding. Oh my God, look at that bloody. Well, that of course does two things. One, it says, as you suggest, the bleeding is the most horrible thing in the world. And this is really a gigantic incident. Or it tells the child, this is how to get attention. You know, if I'm bleeding, if I make a fuss about it, then my parents really care about me. So making a fuss about blood is probably not the wisest thing. But the other thing that happens sometimes with especially fathers and sons, at least here in the United States, probably there too, because fathers can be macho, is to say, buck up, there's nothing wrong. You fell out of a tree, but your arm will be okay. Buck up, you don't have to cry. And then what happens is the child begins to dismiss themselves. In the future, if something's bothering them, they just suppress it because, you know, they're a man. They don't have to have that feeling. And that's not healthy either. So the reaction has to be, I see what's happening with you. Let's see what we can do to make it better. And in that kind of calm presence, as you're saying, we're not going into empathy, sympathy, but what we're going into is listening. When we listen, we say, tell me what's going on. You know, tell me what's going on is one of my big ones. I really, and I it's not even in the book. It's just, I find that I use it all the time. When somebody's having a reaction, instead of saying what's wrong, what's the matter? Those are like, yeah, there's something wrong and the matter. I say, tell me what's going on. And they have to kind of pull back to figure out what's going on. Well, I'm feeling this, or I'm a little afraid of that. And then suddenly you're in a dialogue. Suddenly you know how to help them. And whether it's in psychology or in physiology, whether it's in their body or their spirit, it opens up that dialogue. Tell me what's going on.
But that's equally valid when you do a coaching session or a therapy session, because that's also verbal first aid. I mean, anything you presuppose that is unclean. I'm a fan of clean language. So anything unclean, you know, could trigger something that wasn't there. So after a session in the Peaceful Heart Network, when we teach trauma tapping, you know, for anybody, could somebody please mute that microphone, whoever that is? I'm not sure who it is. I'll mute some microphones, so we'll see what happens.
Elisabeth Fors.
Here we go. So after a session, we don't say, is it good? Is it bad? You know, are you feeling better? Are you feeling worse? We say, okay, what do you notice? Which is basically that, right? It's what do you notice? Because we want the person to make sure for themselves what they actually feel now and what that means to them, rather than assume that it would be good if it's less or bad if it's more.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's a wonderful phrase to say.
And there's a trick. I don't know what you think about it in this case, but there's a trick that my wife used with our kids. Melody, you met her.
Yes, lovely. I love Melody.
Yeah, she's lovely. So what she did when our kids fell down on the floor, instead of going, oh my God, you know, running up and seeing what's going on, sounding Indian, instead she would say, hey, did you find anything?
You know, I used to say to my kids, which chair was it? I'm going to give it a lecture. Did that chair trip you? Tell me which chair, and I will tell it never to do that again. And pretty soon they're so distracted that whatever, it's not that you don't honor. I mean, and then if they say, oh, and look, I cut myself, you say, let's take care of it. You know, come on over, we'll wash it off. Be my partner. You hold the cloth and we'll wash it off.
Yeah, and if this cut could talk, what would it want us to do right now?
good one. That's a good one.
So that's wonderful.
So I like to tell the story of the boy and the bicycle, which I tell all the time. And the reason I tell it is because it was really life and death. And just to convince people, if they don't understand, or they'd say, well, that's nice to say nice things, it really made a difference between life and death with this young boy. And I thought that story I just tell all the time. So I'll tell that. Yes. Oh,
absolutely. My eyes are wide with anticipation and joy.
Thank you. Yeah, me too. You can notice. So I gave a talk in 2006 at the University of Arizona in Tucson Medical Center. And then I went back some years later, and as I was about to give the talk, a psychologist who worked with the fire department came up to me and said, I have to tell you a story. You trained us years ago, and we had an incident, and I want to tell you what happened. So some years before, after I had trained them, but some years before, there was a 14-year-old boy who was riding a bicycle in the street, was hit by a car. The car dragged him. The boy died. And it was tragic and and it certainly had impact on the community. Sometime later, more recently, a 13-year-old boy who knew the other boy was riding his bicycle, was hit by a car, was dragged, and they brought him into the emergency room. And the doctor came out and said to the mother and to this woman, Cynthia Dowdall, who was the psychologist, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. We can't stop the bleeding. Even giving him a transfusion, we cannot stop the bleeding. He's just bleeding out, and there's no way we can help him. And Cynthia said that the mother just curled up on the floor in a fetal position. But Cynthia said, wait, there is something we can do. I was trained in verbal first aid. Let's go in and talk to the boy. And I don't know whether he was conscious or unconscious. I should find that out, but it really doesn't matter because you can still give this message. And she came in and she said, the worst is over. You're here in the hospital. You can stop your bleeding now and save your blood. Everything is being taken care of now. All you have to do is your part, which is stopping the bleeding. And she went on to give the rest of the speech. And then she said, this is so great. And when you're feeling better, Captain Goldberg of the fire department wants to show you the engines and take you on a tour of the fire department. Sometime later, within the hour, the emergency room physician came out and said, I don't know why, but he stopped his bleeding and we can help him now and he's going to heal. But the doctor said he's going to have a long recovery, maybe 6 months. Cynthia told me as she was telling me this story that within 3 weeks, the boy was in the fire department looking at the engines, future trajectory. The reason that he was bleeding so much was the image in his mind was the other boy who died being hit by a bicycle. That's what he thought was the inevitable outcome. When he had a different future, a different outcome, being in the fire department, he didn't have to die. And his whole body reacted that way. And how brilliant that is and how wonderful. And the mother, she says the mother calls it a miracle. And she said, I think so too. It's not, we understand what the mechanism is, that what you're thinking is going to happen in your body. And that's really important. I have another story. That was life and death because that really saved his life. And that was wonderful. But I have another story of, I was giving a lecture at one of the hospitals here in Los Angeles. And after the lecture that you've heard pretty much of right now, he came to the front of the auditorium as I was packing up and he said, now I understand what just happened upstairs. And upstairs is the hospital. We were in an auditorium. And I said, what happened upstairs? And he said, we had an elderly patient who was about to be discharged. Now, the elderly patients, they don't get perfectly better, but he was doing all right. He was holding his own. We could let him go home. And we were about to discharge him. And this morning, all of his vitals were off. When we just checked his pulse, his heart, everything, it was all elevated so much that we couldn't let him go. He said, and what we were wondering was what we could give him. Medications, what medications he needed. He said, now I understand what was going on. I said, what was going on? And he said, well, the clinical psychologist had come and talked to him about hospice. I said, didn't he need hospice? And the doctor said, no, that was just about the future. And we both looked at each other. Yeah, he thought if he was going to have hospice and die, he might as well die right now. He said, I'm going upstairs. I said, you tell him he doesn't need hospice. He says, I'm going up right now. Can you imagine? They were going to load him full of pharmaceuticals to stop all that. And all they had to do was tell him, no, you're not dying. You're doing fine. That's the difference.
It's incredible. It's incredible. There's a little time left. Would you mind telling the story also about the sheriff who came, or who was a fireman, to a car upside down with a small girl jammed in it?
Yeah. That's another favorite. And I get so happy when I get to tell these stories because they prove it to me anyway. I spoke with this firefighter from Northern California, and he said his mother had given him The Worst Is Over to read. And he hadn't paid any attention, but he should have listened, he said, because his mother introduced him to his wife, and that was a good choice. So he should have read the book, but he didn't. And this particular night before he called me, he said he couldn't fall asleep. So he read into it for quite a while and then fell asleep. And when he woke up, he was called to the scene of an accident where a mother and a young girl were in a car crash. The mother both of them were slightly hurt, not terribly hurt. The mother was they could extract her easily. Her side of the car was fine. The other side of the car, where the little girl was smashed in, and she was hysterical. And they had to break the car open to get her out. They call it the jaws of life. And he said, ordinarily I'd have been screaming, get the jaws of life. But instead, he remembered her full first aid. He was able to reach in through a window and touch her shoulder. And he said, I'm a daddy like your daddy, and I have a little girl just like you. And I'm going to take care of you as if you were my little girl. And he said, everything got quiet. Everything got quiet. She stopped crying. They were able to get her out. So he said, so verbal first aid is wonderful. I said, you don't even know what you've done beyond that. Because what you've done is you've obviously helped her to begin healing and not be frightened. But what you also did was you changed the future, because now she's not going to think of this event as the worst thing that ever happened to her. She was in a car crash and she was so scared. No, now she thinks of this as a time of rescue and maybe even a time of her own courage. And so you've helped prevent a trauma forever, for life, by handling it this way. What you say on the scene of an emergency, or a time of fear, or a time of crisis, or when somebody's in an altered state, what you say can set a different trajectory for the future. And he did it right then, so simply.
But not only that, I mean, he basically incited post-traumatic growth even before the trauma was over. Two situations that I have been in, and that I really appreciate, your verbal first aid. One situation is when people are actually on the verge of killing themselves, when they're really suicidal. And the other one is when people are at the end of the road, when people are probably about to die or actually about to die. And what I got from the book, which I really appreciated, and also from talking to you, is people at the brink of death are not interested in you crying for them. They don't want to go out of this world with a bunch of people weeping in their face. They want to hear something fun. They want to hear some chit chat, some gossip, whatever. I mean, we're talking, there's maybe weeks left or whatever. And many people get awkward. They don't know what to say. They're, at least in Sweden, we're very secular. There's no religion to talk about. We can talk about the gods and everything will be fine, on the other side, because we're pretty scientifically pragmatic, which at these times can be a big loss. So could you just say a few words about, talking to people at the end of the road?
Yes, well, there was one woman she was at the end, but she wasn't letting go, and nobody knew why. I mean, she was tired of life. She was old. She was done. And then her son said, I think she wants to say goodbye to Charlie. And they brought in the dog. And the dog, you could hear his little nails clicking on the floor as he came in. And then as he came closer to the bed, his whole body sank down. And he kind of got on his stomach toward the bed. And they picked him up, he was a little dog, and put him on top of her. And everything changed, like the light in the room changed. And shortly thereafter, she died. She wanted to say goodbye. Sometimes there are times that they want to say goodbye. Sometimes when my father died, somebody said to me, he's sticking around because he feels responsibility for his daughters. And so I had to say to him, Dad, we'll be all right. You are going to live forever in our hearts. We can take care of ourselves. Whenever you're ready, you can go. and we will always love you. And just that permission allowed him to go. There are all sorts of things that people need at the end, and if you can glean them, if you can understand some at the back of the new Worst is Over, the second edition, we have one woman talked about, she was sitting with a woman who was dying, and she started to say the worst is over, kind of talk to her, like your body knows just what to do. Your body's going to help take you where you need to go. Listen to your body and relax. Everything is in place, just the way it's supposed to be. And she said everybody in the room was comforted because there were words to say. And the woman just slowly slipped into, the end of her life. So there are so many, as you said, people are afraid, but if you can connect with the person's spirit in some way and figure out what it is that the last thing that they need, what they need from you is not always your tears. What they need from you is your presence, if you can give it. That's what's so sad about COVID. And your encouragement as they take the next step, whatever it is.
So to round this off, verbal first aid is about providing safety and being seen and held. And you had a wonderful, in your lecture when you were here in the workshop, you told a story about a person buried in rubble in an earthquake, which basically wasn't verbal first aid, but it was, except without the words. Would you mind telling that story?
That was actually, there was a bomb in the World Trade Center in the 90s, before the World Trade Center was knocked down by airplanes. Somebody had come in with a van and bombed the basement of the World Trade Center, and people were buried under the rubble. And there was one woman who, they knew she was alive, but they couldn't get to her in a hurry. But a rescuer put his hand in and just held her hand. The whole time he was talking, he didn't know that she couldn't hear him, which is also lovely because his spirit was just reaching her, but he held her hand. And when they finally were able to get to her, she called it borrowed strength. She said, I borrowed strength from his presence. We are, as I said, equipped to help in all kinds of ways we don't even know. We need each other. That's what's got to happen. I'm sorry, I'm getting all exercise now, but this is the truth. We need to understand that we're all in this together. We need to understand that we are the answer to each other as soon as we are loving. We need to understand that love is a great elixir that's going to heal us all in all kinds of ways. And that when we do the good thing, we feel good. It's amazing and wonderful that when you do something good, you're elevated, your vibration raises, you are a better person for it. So we are in this in order to help each other. And as we do it, the more we do it, the better the world becomes. That's what we need, that whole new world that's going to be where we are taking care of each other in the most glorious ways and being taken care of by each other.
Wonderful, Judith. And isn't it true also that when she was taken out of the rubble, he didn't let go of her hand even when they carried her to the ambulance and back to the hospital because he wasn't sure if she would feel unsafe if he suddenly let go?
There was a similar story like that, and yes, it was the woman shot in the head, and he wouldn't let go. But all of it's true that when you are present for someone else, you don't have to know anything. You don't have to be a surgeon or a rescuer. You just have to be present. We can help each other. Yes, presence heals.
And that's why a gift is called a present.
That's right. That's right. And it's really funny, but I tell this story too, that someone was in my office one day and we were just chatting and she started to cry. And she wasn't even reaching for something deep. And I said, what's going on? Which I like to say, what's going on? And she said, you're really listening. And I thought, isn't that sad? It just broke my heart. I mean, first of all, that's my job. That's what she pays me for. I'm supposed to listen. But it means that she hadn't had that experience. We have to start paying attention to each other instead of thinking multitasking is the best thing we do. Yeah, we can multitask. We can be on our computers. We can be on our phones. We can be eating our lunch. We can be waving to somebody out the window. We can be doing all of that. But the person we're talking to knows they're only getting a fraction of your attention. And so that's not healing. When you want to be healing, pay attention.
And I think you told me last time we spoke that you kind of like that when you see people, you can actually discover them as if you really see them for the first time. And a very good phrase is to say, "There you are."
That's right. I do that with kids when I make audios. I have a magic purple fairy who helps kids who are having chemotherapy, girls who are having chemotherapy, and I had to do some with others. And I always begin it that way. There's just some quiet, and then I say, "There you are. I knew I'd find you." And just hearing that, they feel like, "Oh, good, she's paying attention." It's everything. Love is going to be, if you want to know what works, that's it. Sorry, I'm just an old romantic.
No, you're not. You're a mature romantic.
Thank you.
So, people of the tribe, please, we have loads of minutes, 5 of them. So if you want to ask Judith, tell her something, do something, dance for her, whatever.
Just promise me, I'm going to ask you, promise me to find my email address, which is judithsimonprager@yahoo.com, and send me times when you've used it and it's worked. You can see how I love these stories. I'm asking everyone to please give it a try and then write me and say, it doesn't have to save a life. You can say it made a difference. I could see how much of a difference it made. And I was so glad to use it. It just will benefit everyone because I will tell your story. So please send it to me. Thank you.
So I see somebody leaning forward. Is that Roger saying something? You're muted. You need to unmute.
I was just writing in the chat, but I can say it to you directly. Really touching. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much for being touched. That shows that you are just the person I wanted to talk to.
I sure am.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anneli Skog, why don't you, do you have anything to say? I mean, you're working with this all the time in MSB.
Yeah, but not in real case outdoors of the, if I say so. But I think this is something that the firefighters and police and ambulance people and so on need to hear. I have a colleague with me here, Yvonne Nesman, and we have talked about that a lot of times. We need to have this in the education. That's my opinion. I think this is so important, how we meet people. And I think that COVID maybe can light us up, as you did say, that we touch each other and meet each other on more loving ways. What you say is so important.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I don't speak Swedish, and I hope I didn't talk too fast for everybody. I appreciate that you allow me to speak English because that's all I've got.
We can replay in slow motion. Cecilia.
I have an opposite story. When I was a kid, I got sick. I got some flu or something. And my parents, they took me to the hospital, but I didn't feel so sick as I was until the nurse came and took my temperature. And she said, oh, that's very high. And suddenly I understood I am sick. And then I felt so sick, but I recovered. But it's so...
That's right. That's right. I wrote a whole book, but it never got published. It was for the American Medical Association about what doctors say that is wrong. And they do, like, you have 6 months to live. No, we don't set our watch and believe that. No, we don't.
Once I had a course for doctors in communication, not as good as you have, of course, but I said to them that I thought it should be wrong to tell how bad it is. But then a doctor said to me, well, we need to tell the truth. But as you say now, it gives me I don't know what to say, but it's right. You don't need to tell lies, but you can choose the right words.
Exactly. It is hopeful to know that there are ways to say it that will not scar the person. We don't want to scar them so that they carry around the fright. One doctor told me that her little girl was outside and she scraped her leg or something, and the mother said, did it hurt? And she said, it only hurt when I got frightened. Yes. And that's, so don't frighten anybody, just help them to heal. That's the secret. So thank you for that comment.
Like we said, there is even, I don't remember what, Milton Erickson or Richard Bandler, who said that a doctor is not allowed to project into the future because that is a belief. You have no right to state that you know how many minutes, months, or years anybody has. That's not the truth. That's a belief. So, they should only talk about where you are, not where you might be going. Leave that to a priest or fortune teller.
I was going to say, unless they're planning on killing you, they have no idea.
Exactly. Then they know exactly. All right, Judith, this was wonderful as usual. We're thrilled to have you. We're really happy. We're going to be posting this out so people can watch it after. And, we always promote you in every single way. Thank you so much from everybody. So is there anything else you need to tell us, or can we just simply invite you back in a reasonable amount of time and continue?
Anytime you want me, I'm yours, Ulf. You and I, bless you all. May you go out and be wonderful. Yes.
Stay great. Thanks, everybody. Wonderful. Remember, in the NLP Society, you will find good stuff. This is good stuff. Even if it wasn't here, it was good stuff. Bye, everybody. Bye, Judith. Take care. Love you.
Bye. Love you.